fairy godmother, quirky queens, a heroine who wins the day. What more could we want than Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella from 1997? Welcome to Let's Chat, the podcast where we discuss movies, TV, and theater like old friends. I am your host, Dee, a casual consumer of visual media who enjoys chatting about them. Today we discuss Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella from 1997. The musical stars Brandy Norwood, billed as Brandy, as Cinderella, Bernadette Peters as Cinderella's stepmother, she's not given a name, Natalie Desselle as stepsister Minerva, Leanne Cox as stepsister Calliope, Jason Alexander as Lionel, Whoopi Goldberg as Queen Constantina, Victor Garber as King Maximilian, Paolo Montalban as Prince Christopher, and Whitney Houston as Fairy Godmother. Ms. Houston would also be the producer. This is directed by Rob Isikoff and written by Robert Friedman. This is the synopsis. Cinderella, forced into a life of household chores by her cruel stepmother and stepsisters, dreams of a different life. The town crier announces a royal ball at which the prince of the kingdom intends to find a bride, and Cinderella wishes that she could attend. When her stepsisters and stepmother go off to the ball, a fairy godmother appears and magically grants Cinderella's wish. At the ball, Cinderella and the prince dance, but she abruptly excuses herself at midnight, leaving only a glass slipper on the palace steps. After an extensive search throughout the kingdom, the prince and Cinderella are magically reunited and blissfully married. What was your relationship with this movie? Well, I'll tell you about mine. When Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella was remade in 1997 for The Wonderful World of Disney on ABC, our family was elated. I was a child then who was always excited whenever Rodgers and Hammerstein's names were invoked. We had seen the national tour of The Sound of Music on stage. We were developing our Rodgers and Hammerstein VHS collection, and to discover that there was a work from this dynamic duo that would be revived was just wonderful. My memory is hazy, but I believe that I was aware of the 1965 version of Cinderella starring Leslie Ann Warren. Certainly, once we watched the 1997 version, the songs were familiar, but I had no idea of the original with Julie Andrews until looking at the TV guide. Back then, to know what was on terrestrial television, one would buy a copy of this magazine that would tell you what is coming on the TV. Occasionally, if they were heavily promoting a show, there would be articles about that program. There was such a one about the upcoming 1997 Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella. They played up the pedigree of the production by aligning all three actors who have played Cinderella. Brandy in 1997, Leslie Ann Warren in 1965, and to my surprise back then, Julie Andrews in 1957, the original. Julie Andrews worked with Rodgers and Hammerstein before The Sound of Music. I had no idea as a child about this earliest production that was only seen once. I also did not know about the Internet Movie Database at this time, so the idea of looking at a person's full filmography meant finding a book on the subject, which I didn't have. So much in the TV Guide article was new to me. The guide also mentioned that there were three different people who played the fairy godmother: Whitney Houston, Celeste Holm, and originally Edie Adams. I was elated. Edie Adams was someone that I had known as a child as a comic force of nature in the 1960s, so I knew that I would enjoy the original. I had no idea that the 1957 Cinderella, however, would not be available for home viewing until the next century. So the earliest one remained a unicorn in our Rodgers and Hammerstein collection for a very long time. Back then, one did not expect to see a TV movie more than once. Some people would try to record a program on VHS tape to be able to see it on demand. However, Walt Disney would release the 1997 version of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella on VHS tape with their signature white clamshell cover. They did not always create VHS tapes for their wonderful World of Disney TV movies. So Brandy's Cinderella was presented as something special that they wanted people to own. So, of course, we purchased it. Now, let's talk about the movie itself. We see the 1997 version of Cinderella building on the previous two. In the original, we see Cinderella introduced struggling with boxes on the town square, following behind her family. Part of the crowd milling around as they sing a song, "The Prince is Giving a Ball." The 1965 version introduces Cinderella at home alone while family is in town. So Cinderella meets a random man on horseback who needs water. This is the prince. They converse. He goes away and sings a ballad of longing. In the 1997 version, we see this introduction of Cinderella combined. The first two are combined in this one introduction. Cinderella is seen struggling with her family shopping boxes in the town square, like the original version. But instead of a crowd song, we get a ballad, like in the second version of Cinderella, with the addition of a duet so they can meet cute after having sung a song of longing as the prince, in disguise as a peasant, helps Cinderella with her fallen boxes. This meeting up front helps to establish the rapport that they have with each other, since they will be apart for more than they will be together in the film. You see, they meet at the beginning, they separate, they meet again at the ball, they separate, and then they meet at the end for the wedding. So they need as much time together as possible to make this relationship believable. Having them sing the same song before knowing each other helps the audience to believe that they belong together. And what is this song? It's called The Sweetest Sounds. This is the song that they sing at the top of the movie. It is a duet originally from the musical No Strings, lyrics and music by Richard Rodgers. This is the first song in a show about an interracial romance played by Diahann Carroll and Richard Kiley on Broadway in 1962. Given that the casting of the 1997 version of Cinderella is also an interracial, interethnic romance, the filmmakers are here connecting the two young actors, Brandy and Paolo Montalban, with an earlier work from Rodgers, who, along with Hammerstein, is no stranger to addressing these ideas in song. It further connects Brandy, a recording artist and TV star, to Diahann Carroll, who also starred in a popular TV show and sings on stage. In other words, the casting is nothing new to the Rodgers or the Hammerstein oeuvre, and they're giving the audience in American musical theater history lesson that most of us were not fully aware of. The interethnic, interracial romance is not commented upon in the plot of this movie, but in using this particular song to introduce the characters, the filmmakers are nodding in the direction of this particular issue. Now, switching gears, there are two things that stand out to me that feel like Disney influences. As we've already established, this version of Cinderella was shown on The Wonderful World of Disney. The other two were not, the earlier two. I wonder if the writer Robert L. Friedman received notes from the mouse. For instance, the prince appears first in peasant garb because he wants to be among the people and just get away. This feels very much like Disney's Jasmine in Aladdin, which was released a few years prior, who does exactly the same thing. It also feels like Disney's The Little Mermaid, who is a princess upset about the strictures of the court system into which she is born and wants out of it. Although the prince here, Prince Christopher, is often shown in other versions as not enjoying the concept of arranged marriages, he usually doesn't go so far as to wander around with the subjects and live an alternate life until this Disney version. So it very much feels like he's a Disney prince because of that. Further, there's an extra character in the form of comedian Jason Alexander, who is the prince's dresser and confidant. We don't have this character in the earlier two films. He serves the same purpose as the classic Disney sidekick who will be around the protagonist, he'll help them brainstorm, and will be a sounding board for one of the main characters, in the same way that the chameleon is in Disney's Rapunzel movie called Tangled. Now, let's discuss the fairy godmother. Another standout in this film is how the fairy godmother, played by Whitney Houston, bookends the film. Usually this character in any version of the story, whether it's Rodgers and Hammerstein or otherwise, is in and out on the night that Cinderella goes to the ball. But not this version. In this version, before the credits, the fairy godmother sings "Impossible," breaking the fourth wall and singing directly to camera. Then the movie begins. At the end, when the prince and Cinderella are on a wedding procession in a carriage from Cindy's house to the castle, the fairy godmother sings a song from the film Main Street to Broadway called "There's Music in You." And on the last note, the camera pans up from the ceremony to witness fairy godmother ascending to the sky. So we begin and end on this magical being. The 1997 version follows in the footsteps of the second one from 1965 and introduces the fairy godmother to Cindy on camera, meaning Cinderella does not know who this is. The first Cinderella already knew the godmother before the wishing begins. There is also the continuation of godmother as helper and less of godmother as mischief maker, as she is in the 1957 version. Another standout here is the fact that we have returned to quirkiness all around. You see, in the 1957 version, everybody's quirky except maybe the two leads because they're too busy being in love. In the 1965 version, the only people who really stand out as wacky and silly are the stepmother and stepsisters. The royals have stately elegance about them. They are sober, and Cinderella fits in with the royals a lot better than she does with her stepsisters and stepmother, simply in terms of personality and way of existing. But here we are in the 1997 version, and we have returned to the quirks all around. And so you see the Queen Constantina, played by Whoopi Goldberg, very quirky and making squeaks and peeps, and whenever her son does not agree with her, and calling dramatically for her smelling salts, which is reminiscent of a stepsister, Minerva, played by Natalie Desselle, who yells a line that Kay Ballard says in the original, "I want a chance at him." So Kay Ballard is speaking in a stage whisper to her mother. The Minerva version of this is yelling across the ballroom. I don't remember it being so loud, but it was so shocking when I rewatched it for this podcast. And as I've mentioned in different episodes, this humor in the second Cinderella makes a distinction between the royals, who are sober, and Cinderella's family, who are loud. In the 97 version, we return to what the original did, and wild and weird things can come out of anyone, except the two juvenile leads. To sum it up, Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella 1997 holds true to the original, nods in the direction of its immediate predecessor, brings in other parts of the Rodgers and or Hammerstein catalog while also bringing its own unique flair. Recommendations. Of course, I would suggest watching the 1957 version of Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella, as well as the 1965 version with Leslie Ann Warren. It gives you a sense of how the 1997 version builds upon what has come before while also creating their own. This has been Let's Chat with Dee. See you next time.